Welcome into the Pool Genius Week 5 Circa Survivor show. My name is Spencer, and I'm joined by our lead analyst over at Pool Genius, Jason Lisk. And how we doing this week, Jason? Looking forward to this Circa Survivor contest.
Yeah, we're good. I mean, I think I'm questionable for Thursday night. I visited San Francisco, came up with a limp, and now I'm questionable able to watch the game, but
Something in the water.
something in the water there. We'll get to that in a bit, but yeah, ready for another week of Circa. Actually, this is a fascinating week. I'm ready to get to it. I think there's been weeks we've talked about, oh, I don't like this week, that week. This to me is a quintessential Survivor week right here.
Yeah, and before we get to that, we'll ask you, like we do every week, if you find this helpful at all, either for your Circa Survivor contest, where I know there's a lot of you watching who are in other contests with similar formats to Circa, go ahead, like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay in the loop. Follow us all season long. We're going to be putting out these videos. Jason also does another episode early in the week with overall NFL Survivor strategy with Steven Andrus, so you can check that out as well. But for this one, we're going to dive into the Circa Survivor numbers. We're going to look at our data grid, pull some projected popularity, which have been really accurate the last few weeks. We've been kind of on the money. And when I say we, I will say you, Jason, because you do most of that legwork. But I will accept the compliments on social media and feel like I'm contributing. But you've done a really great job with the pick popularity this week. So what do you see for week 5 coming out here?
Yeah, so week 5, this is a week where we have, I think, really only 7 options that you should probably even be writing on the board. I know we've seen some comments, by the way, on our YouTube video for the main week talking about the Saints or the Giants. Those people should get together and just make side bets. I would not put my Circa life on the Saints or the Giants just on the theory of, hey, I'm never going to use them again. You don't have to use them. I promise you can get through 20 teams without going with a coin flip game like that in a week like this. But there are 7 teams that I think are in play. They are the 7 I think are going to draw all the popularity this week. So I think most people will agree. We'll get a smattering on no picks and on some of these others still, because there's still over 10,000 entries still alive. So we still have enough people out there with different opinions, but the vast majority are going to be on the 7. You have 2, I think, future value savings teams. You have some high EV plays. You have some mixes of those things, and you have some contrarian plays that say riskier odds, all in play this week. So I think a fascinating strategic week.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and look at our top projected team in terms of pick popularity. Looks like we have the Arizona Cardinals. Really no surprise here, as they are playing the dreadful Tennessee Titans at home. The Tennessee Titans have not looked good, and it went from bad to worse last week against the Houston Texans. And really, conceivably, this is probably your last spot to use Arizona if you have not already. I know it says, as we look at the data grid here, they are available to 47% of the pool. So even with that, we still project them around 30 to 32%. So that means they're going to be heavily used on those entries that have them available, right?
Yeah, because I feel like a fair amount of entries that haven't used them will be like, I need to catch up by also using Arizona, right? But I don't think you're going to get uniform agreement on that. So this number's a little tricky. We're at about 2/3 of the available using them, but it's not a scenario. It's not a situation where everybody has them uniformly. The low number of the people with few entries left, the single entry remainers, the 2s and 3s. We pulled this data. David pulled this data for us. Those are at about 41%. So about 41% of people with a low amount of entries have Arizona. So even less than what we're showing. The ones that still have them at higher rates are the ones that are like the larger portfolios. And so are those people all going to want to push in on Arizona, or some of those portfolio players going to want to play against Arizona? That's why I'm hesitant to go higher than this number, because I do think the single entries could break for Arizona, but they can only make up so much of that number.
Yeah, and that's a really good point there. We do have them they are favored by 8 at home. Our odds are a little bit down on them compared to the market odds, but it's really not that much of a difference to, highly impact EV or anything like that. The market has them around 78, 79% win odds. We're about 75-ish. So we're like a little bit lower on Arizona than the market average. Can you explain that a little bit, Jason? Or is that just us having them lower in the power ratings compared to what the market is, or how does that work?
The Pool Genius win odds is what you're talking about? How
Yes.
those numbers, so those are based on our models, and those come up each week, right? I can't predict what our model will say for week 10. We're setting like just basically market odds for week 10 based on what we think the spread difference will be. So this is a model number that's based on a lot of factors. I don't want to bore the users, but it includes things like a decision tree model. So it's looking at stat factors. It's looking at like a variety of things: the spread amount, the total, the type of matchup. Like, is it a division matchup? Is it not? And what are the stat factors in the teams coming into the game? And so this model, we're lower on Arizona's chances to win than the market. Now, I just pulled this research. I shared it in Discourse. We had questions. Well, why should I trust your numbers, right? We did pull the data back to 2001, which is when we put a bit of more of a market cap, like to keep it closer to the market. But on ones where we are 3% or more lower than the market, the results have come in near our number and not the market's number. Like, so the teams that we're lower on have actually lost and won at a rate similar to what we projected and not what the market projected on those cases where we're basically fading the big favorite. This was looking at all favorites of over 60% market win odds. And so there are reasons we like to use our models, because they have actually done a good job of identifying favorites that are a little riskier for whatever reason. Maybe it's based on how many yards they're producing relative to their points, their red zone performance, things like that, or the opponent underperforming in some of those areas and providing some value. And so, yeah, we're lower on Arizona, but your decision on Arizona is largely driven by, do you want to play them as a future value and savings pick and eat the rest of that up because you probably aren't going to consider them again this year if you have available? Or do you want to play against them because over 30% of the pool could be on them? And that's really where I think that's more of a philosophical decision, like you said, and not, oh, do I think it's 75 versus 76 versus 77? It's, do I want to play against the 30% pick team, or can I afford to do so?
Yeah, and I think those are all important things that you brought up, and I wanted to bring up the Pool Genius win odds because we did have some questions on that, and I think it's good to clarify as we look at these, but that's not gonna make a huge difference here no matter how you slice it. Like, Arizona, in my opinion, and as you just said, is the starting point of this decision tree that is week 5 in Circa Survivor. So what you wanna do with them, you've probably, if you have a portfolio, you probably use them. They've been popular in a couple weeks already. So do you just want to sprinkle them through your remaining entries that haven't used them, eat up that future value because you probably won't have a chance to do it, to use them later in the season, or are you going to pivot? And where should you pivot to? When does that make sense? And that's what we're going to look at. One of the teams you could pivot to, but they are popular as well, Indianapolis Colts. We have them at 25% estimated pick popularity. Of course, those can change. We recommend that you follow us over on X to get the latest pick popularity updates for Circa Survivor. I usually post those. I posted yesterday, so I post on like Tuesdays and then either Fridays or Saturdays. Saturday morning, I post an updated pick projection so you can make those final decisions if you're getting those into a proxy or whatnot. But yeah, we have Indianapolis as the second most popular, hosting Las Vegas Raiders, favored by a touchdown at home. What's the deal with the Colts? I know they have one more spot coming up fairly soon. I believe they host Tennessee. Yeah, week 8, they host Tennessee. Next week, they host the Cardinals, which could be a sneaky spot there. A little bit of a shade of green there, not the bright green jumping off the page
Yeah,
like
I'll
them
switch
against
over here
Tennessee.
to win odds
Yep.
for our future. Yeah, we see week 6, we see Arizona or Indy is on the board. If the results go, Indy looks better, Arizona doesn't this week, that number could go up, and then Indy's in play again, right? But the Indy is definitely one of our projected big favorites and probably one of the most popular picks you're going to see in week 8. They don't have a ton of like weeks where they should draw a big popularity, and so you might get them more concentrated. So I think what you're thinking about with Indy is, A, do I use them in this contest? You probably do, right? Over a 20-week period. And B, when do I want to use them? Would I rather do it in week 8 when they're probably going to be high chalk but have higher win odds, or now when they're second chalk as a direct counter to Arizona, or in an alternative week where that pops up, which is possible, right? Including next week. A week 17 spot is in play. There's other spots where right now we'd say they're probably a 3-point favorite, but if their power rating goes up just a bit, I think they bring about 2 or 3 more weeks into play. And so if they're a little better than we think, it's that old saw of Survivor. If the team is better than you think, that's probably a good thing you picked them. That means they probably got through. And then their path probably gets more options if they look good, which is what we saw with Seattle, who now has some spots that we didn't think were there 2 weeks ago. And so we could see the same with the Colts. And so I think the Colts are one of those interesting, fascinating choices of, is this the week you want to play them? Is this the week you want to sprinkle them or not? Or how do you want to do this with the other options on the board?
Yeah, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I will say with that week 8 conundrum with the Colts, you kind of have to look at your other options if you plan on burning them this week and make sure they're available. Because we're talking week 8 here. Philadelphia is projected to have the top win odds that week against the Giants. Then it's the Colts right behind them, hosting Tennessee, then Buffalo Bills, then Baltimore Ravens. Then we're getting below 70% and we're going Tampa Bay, at New Orleans, Kansas City, hosting the Commanders. So figure out what you want to do on that week 8. I'm not saying you have to lock yourself into the Colts right now, but if you want them available as a life raft, so to speak, on week 8, because you don't want to burn a Philly because you already took Baltimore, or they still have injury issues with Lamar Jackson, which could easily be the case, and you don't want to use them when their MVP quarterback is hurt. And then what have you done with Buffalo? Do you want to use Buffalo at Carolina? Do you want to save them for later, or have you already used them? So I would implore you to look at that week 8 schedule before making that decision on the Colts this week.
Yeah, I mean, you should always be thinking about, how do I want to play this contest out? What helps me? How many different ways do I want to play it out if I'm playing multiple entries, right? Because that week 8 spot, I can make an argument either way, just like we can argue this week, right? If I've got Baltimore in hand and I want to wait till Thanksgiving with Baltimore, I might be more willing to file Philadelphia that week if I have both as a counter. And I might play against the Colts, maybe at 40% ownership, right? That's one way to do it. The other way is also to play the Colts. And the other way is to be comfortable falling back to an Atlanta, New England, somebody like that, who is more similar to going with Seattle this week, or a team like that, or New England last week, right? And so those are the choices you kind of have in your head of where do I want to take my shots against popularity versus where do I want to eat the chalk, because I think it's a good pick and it helps my entry advance.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify one thing before we get on to the next team in pick popularity. When Jason says go against a team, we are mostly talking about taking a stand against them, as in we are not implementing them into our portfolio. We are instead choosing other teams. So we have had some listeners and some people pop in. It's a legit comment if you're sort of new to this. They think taking a stand against the Colts, say in week 8 against Tennessee, would mean picking Tennessee. We do not recommend that at all. Who knows? Things could change by then. But we're saying take a stand, as in don't pick them. Pick
as
a different.
I'm going to be off of them. So if the upset happens, my portfolio goes through cleanly, has the potential to move and advance and move up in value. So thanks for clarifying that, because I do throw that around. I just want to be clear, like you said. When I talk about which side do you want to take a stand on, it's more like, let's be off a team and not pick them, and just stay off that game just in case the upset happens.
The reason I brought that up to clarify is because I'm the one who usually fields these comments through social media and have to explain it. So I'm just doing some work up front for myself.
Thank you.
Instead of explaining it later. But let's move on to the third most popular team, which it's actually a tie here. So we can do 3 and 4 together, and these actually might shift. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, and we just got some breaking news. Wasn't so breaking. It was really trending in that direction the whole time that the 49ers will be without Brock Purdy, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, among others. George Kittle's still out. Whole slew of injuries for San Francisco 49ers on a short week, playing at the LA Rams, who have looked good lately. That spread has ballooned up to Rams favored by 7.5. They got the hook, I believe, before they announced all those injuries. It was around 6.5 to 7. Now they moved it all the way up through the hook. We have the Rams projected at 16% pick popularity, which is tied with Detroit right now. I guess, Jason, I want you to talk about the Rams first, and then we can kind of fall back on Detroit. Do you think they will get steamed above this 16%? As we see, they are available to 89% of the field. How are you looking at the Rams on Thursday night football?
I mean, I raised this number to 16 just here an hour or two before the show, before we recorded. It's educated guesswork because I look at the public pick data, and Joe Schmo and the public is not going to be on the Rams on a Thursday night. It's probably not up on because they see 49ers. They're not going to want to be picking that game. And it's early in the week before most people have thought about their survivor pick. Circa's different. People are thinking about their pick right now. And they're seeing that line movement. And they're mostly available. And so I do think I would be shocked at this point if the Rams came in the low teens. I think it's mid-teens to upper teens, and I've said it at 16. I could be talked into going up from there based on availability. It's just a question of how people, I think, break on deciding the Arizona or Indy versus should I go against them by picking somebody else and staying off of them, what we just talked about. And the Rams might be that logical choice that then leads people to save Detroit and Buffalo and teams like that. So I think there's lots of reasons to expect the Rams to get steam. It's just how many of the Circa entries are going to put in a Thursday pick. Because while I think the Circa crowd is going to be on it, I also think there's a segment that will not be locked into putting their picks in on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, so one thing you said in there really stood out to me, and I know this is a Circa Survivor show, but I also know that a lot of people who are in Circa Survivor play in different contests across everywhere, Splash Sports, DraftKings, BetOnline, anywhere. I'm in a lot of those contests too. Would you say the Rams are a really good pick in those contests where maybe they're not as sharp and maybe people aren't getting their picks in before the Thursday deadline, so they could be suppressed a little bit? Like,
I think the Rams are a massive EV play if you think your pool's going to come in under 10%.
That's exactly what I was looking for.
That means that 6% has to go somewhere else, right? Where's it going? Arizona, Indy?
Yes.
Right? That just increases your chances of benefiting if there's an upset. And so, yeah, if I'm in a pool that I can jump in and pick the Rams this week, if you can get a late start or a second chance pool that's starting up this week and jamming in picks on the Rams before half the pools even thought about filling, that's a good way to go.
That's the Jason Lisk special. We outlined that with when Buffalo was playing Miami. If you could just jam Buffalo in there.
Yeah, especially in a contest that may not fill. There are some out there, right?
Yeah.
And so grabbing that, especially like the last decision was Buffalo. Buffalo has more future value than the Rams. With the Rams, even if that pool catches me at 20%, I got in good if it's going to have overlay. So I'm willing to do that with the Rams in this spot. We want to talk about the Rams and future value. I think this is a great spot for them, but I mean, this is an unexpected spot, right? How popular will they get? I think if there's a potential they get so popular, it does impact week 9. But unless we see this number get up to like 25%, I still think the Rams are going to be massively popular on week 9. That's a week where they play the Saints at home. I've got them projected at 44% popularity. So depending on how you like to play it, if you're like, I want to take that decision out of my hands, then you want to pick the Rams now at a good spot and knowing you're basically going to be off the most popular pick on that entry in week 9, even though it's a really high win odds spot. Or you may be like, man, I want the Rams against the Saints in week 9, so I'm going to save them. That's a decision you have to make because they're going to be really heavily owned, I think. They're going to be used up after week 9. And so their later value is just going to be contrarian spots at low ownership after week 9. But I think this is a good spot to consider them for sure.
And I'm really glad you brought that up because that is such an underrated tool that we have that it's fairly new. We just implemented that. We used to show just win odds. Now we show EV and projected pick percentage for future weeks in our Circa Survivor tool. So definitely worth it there. Of course, everything's going to change. But you can kind of map out like, hey, they're going to be chalkier than chalk in week 9. And if you're a player who likes to take opportunities and go against that and find leverage, which I would advise that's the type of player you should be when in a pool this large, those are really valuable things to look at. And it's part of our tools that I don't look at enough. So I'm glad that you reminded me it's there, Jason, because
we haven't talked about this, but I'm going to bring this up because this is how pools can be crushed, right? When the 80% team that's owned at 40% gets upset unexpectedly. Yeah. I believe it was 2019, 20, somewhere in there. It may have been 20. So correct me. We'll check it. We'll put it down. There was a week 10 with the Colts as a heavy favorite over the Dolphins, who had 1 win all year. And the Saints, strangely enough, as the heavy favorite, I believe, over Atlanta, who only had 1 win in that game. They were like 80% of the pool was on one of those two teams. They were the massive favorites. There was a big drop off. That pool genius, we recommended largely staying off of them because of the unique opportunity to basically play against two extremely high owned, high odds. The odds of an upset happening were not great. They were under 20% or so, roughly in the 20% range. But what happened that week? They both lost. You know what happened to Survivor pools? We have people emailing us. I just won my pool. I have 5 of the last 7 entries left. The pool was wiped out. Like 10% of the pool was left, but I was off of them. Those are the shots. That's the shot that would totally swing Circa Survivor, where suddenly we're not talking about, will there be 50 winners? We're talking about, will there be 5, right? And so those are just something to think about. Like, do you want to be on the Rams at 80% when they should win? Or do you want to kind of think about using them in spots to set you up to fade them that week by not having them available to you to pick?
Yeah, that's an excellent point because it really gets into the mentality of how you should be looking at this thing, even beyond just this week, even beyond the week 9 example that we brought up. And it's a great reminder because things have been so chalky so far in Circa Survivor and Survivor pools in general. Kind of lulls some people back into that thought process of like, oh yeah, this is all about future value savings, whatnot. It's like, no, those upsets can strike at any point in time. So that's a great reminder there. Let's go to the other team you have projected at 16% pick popularity, the Detroit Lions, at the lifeless, Joe Burrow-less Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah.
The Lions are favored by 10.5 on the road. We give them 84% win odds. Granted, the Lions are a Thanksgiving and a Christmas team for Circa Survivor purposes. They are projected to be, well, it might be a coin flip-ish type of game, hosting Green Bay on Thanksgiving. And then they are at Minnesota on Christmas, and we really don't know what the Vikings are going to look like then. Still, the way they are playing, they are looking like a team you probably want to save on some entries. How are you approaching the Lions in week 5?
Yeah. So the Lions are an interesting one. I think they're one that is very entry dependent. Like, right? I'm not sure you're going to have a better spot than the Lions this week. Just in the way it's set up. The only other argument would be, do you want to use them at low ownership on Thanksgiving when the pool may be concentrated on Baltimore and Philly firing for that big upset block? But here you're getting like 60%, 55 to 60% of the pool that's going to be on teams that are riskier than they are. And that's why their EV is so high, because you are basically like, if you think about it in poker terms, you have the better hand and you get people betting into you. And so that's a position you want to be in. You want to play cards like that, right? You want to play hands like that. And so you have the better hand if you play Detroit. Problem is you use them and you can only play them once. And that's why I say it's entry dependent. What else have you used? If you used none of the holiday teams, this is a strong week to consider them. I mean, you like I said, you're not going to get too many times where you're going to have a couple teams more popular than choice at lower win odds, giving you the opportunity for a big EV payoff. And Detroit actually profiles me as the kind of that most people are going to save, and thus their EV is actually going to go down as the season goes on, because they're going to be mostly available to people at Thanksgiving and the weeks that follow. We'll see if that works out that way. But I think if you're willing to be contrarian here, using Detroit. But the problem is, if you've used Kansas City, if you've used Baltimore, if you've used Philadelphia, if you've already used Detroit like we did on a couple of entries, I'll show you our entries, in fact, right? So here's some of our entries. You'll see that we used Detroit on a couple of them here, right? We did that as a contrarian play back in week 2 when we were trying to stay off Dallas. That shot did not work out for us.
It almost worked.
It almost worked, and that's why we play it. And Detroit won. And at the time, remember, we were looking at an 0-1 Detroit.
Yep.
We were looking at an 0-1 Detroit.
They lost bad at Green Bay.
Who had lost bad at Green Bay. And so we didn't think their future value is quite what it is now, where we didn't think they'd be catching 10 points in consecutive games by week 4. So, I mean, if I had it to do over, if I knew Detroit was going to be so awesome over the last 3 weeks, I would probably rather have them. And so, like, on those entries, we can't consider them, right? Or the one is use KC, because I think if you used KC and Detroit, then you're almost tied into Washington on Christmas. And I don't know that you want to tie yourself to one outcome as a projected favorite yet. And so I'm very much entry dependent on Detroit. I think if you've gotten through with 4 great future value savings and haven't touched the holiday team, I think Detroit's in play this week.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. So what about, we have quite the drop here in projected pick popularity. We have those teams at the top, those 4 teams, and then we go down. We have Buffalo projected at 4%, basically because Buffalo's like double-digit favorite. I mean, they're close to a double-digit favorite this week, but they have been and they will be double-digit favorites moving forward. Plenty of spots to pick them. Highest future value of anyone we have. Plus, they're only available to 43% of the pool. How are you looking at Buffalo on Sunday Night Football, favored by 9 at home, against the Patriots team that's looked pretty decent lately?
Yeah, I mean, when we were thinking about this week 2 or 3 weeks ago, I thought Buffalo was a really good contrarian option to Arizona and Indianapolis' potential high popularity then, right? I think with Detroit emerging, with the Rams emerging, maybe they're behind those because they do have a lot of other spots. But I think they're completely justifiable on EV grounds right now. Because here's the thing. A team can have high future value, but why do we save them? We save them to use them in a great week. Yep. A week where picks could be concentrated elsewhere, where you can have them at low ownership, and where they have a really good EV. Well, that's what this week is. So I think, again, this is kind of entry dependent, like how you want to play out. Look at Buffalo's other good weeks. Where would you relatively rather think they fit on your entry? Because I think this week and week 10 are both kind of those potential swing weeks, and they are a good contrarian option on both weeks, and that are risky in different ways. And so those are 2 I'd look at. Week 8, you mentioned Indy. Well, Buffalo's an option there as a contrarian play, another high EV spot. And then Buffalo in week 14, when they probably are still catching a Cincinnati team without Joe Burrow. I don't think he'll be back by week 14. Would be aggressive in the timeline, but it's I guess possible. So that one's a little more uncertain given how far out it is, but I do think this is a spot to use Buffalo, just as there are 3 or 4 others. You can only use them once, so they can have all the future value you want, but you're going to only realize it in one certain week in this contest, and you got to decide when that week is. Does it make sense for your entry? Buffalo could be in play depending on who you've used.
And it's also interesting. Buffalo is not Thanksgiving or Christmas dependent, which is weird because they're like one of the top teams in the league. You think logically that they probably should be on those slates, but they're not this year.
Yeah, you would think the league would want them on one of those two.
Yeah, you got MVP coming.
Instead of putting KC or Detroit on twice, you think they could have mixed in a Buffalo on Christmas, right? Make the Buffalo Bills fans gather around the TV on Christmas afternoon, like they've done to my Chiefs for the last several years.
Oh, so it's personal. Where you're. I was wondering where you're going with that. But
yeah,
it's personal for a Chiefs fan.
Flashbacks, family time, and it's like, oh, there's a Chiefs game in there.
All right, below Buffalo here. Are you dipping into these? So those were the top 5 teams in terms of both win odds and pick popularity. Are you dipping below that? The most logical picks in that range. We're talking Minnesota playing in London against Cleveland, who switched quarterbacks to the rookie Dylan Gabriel. Of course, Minnesota, ton of issues. Offensive line, couple defensive injuries. Carson Wentz still quarterback. Looked like a mess last week against the Steelers. We're projecting them at 4%. They are 3.5-point favorites. And we are down on them in terms of the Pool Genius win odds compared to the market win odds. So I would lump them together, and also Seattle, we are a little bit higher on, as a 4-point favorite against Tampa Bay. Ton of injuries on the Buccaneers.
And that line has moved, by the way. We were looking at 3.5 all week until, say, the last hour or so while we're recording. So Seattle continuing up, so moving toward our number. Do I think they're in play? I think they are in play for you to consider. Will we pull the trigger? I don't know. We're going to talk about it on any. Minnesota, I think there's variables on both sides. You and I have talked about the travel that Cleveland's dealing with, whereas Minnesota's gotten to stay over there, and we don't have a large sample size, but the teams that get to stay and have a travel advantage are 2-0 against the spread so far in the Jags, I think in both cases. Yes. This is the first non-Jag team to do it. You got the new quarterback, you've got the injuries from Minnesota. There's lots of variables on both sides, so it's definitely a riskier play. That said, I don't think Minnesota has a ton of future value other than as a fallback option on Christmas if you need a pick. I'm not sure you need them to get through the rest of the year. They could be a team we're talking about as an alternative in another week, but I don't think there's a smash spot where you're like, oh, I have to have Minnesota in case for this week. I think using them and getting through with them sets your entry up well and keeps you off the really popular ones this week. So that is in play. It's kind of like I think I talked about with Miami last time. I'm probably not looking to concentrate on that. If you have 10 entries and you want to throw a Minnesota to see if you can get one through while staying off the popular picks, I think that's a reasonable consideration. Whether you choose to do so, I think you can make that argument. Seattle, low ownership, has better spots. Their future value has actually gone up. And so I think this is a case where, as an alternative, if you didn't pick a ton of Seattle and you stayed off of them in week 3, you could mix them in here. I also think they're going to come up in week 10, a tough week. They're going to come up in week 12, and they could be now in an extremely tough week 17B that still does not project well. Seattle at Carolina may be one of your highest spread games that weekend as we almost close out the season. So there are enough spots where I'm probably not like that aching to pick Seattle. But if I'm looking for an alternative and I want to stay off the popular picks, they're at least in the consideration discussion.
Yeah, and I will actually make the argument for the Minnesota Vikings too, especially if they get healthier, if they get their stuff together. They can certainly look like a better team down the road in several weeks than they are right now in their current state. And they have some favorable matchups as we see it moving forward. They have a week 11 against Chicago, week 16 at the New York Giants. Who knows what the Giants will look like by then. So Minnesota does have a little bit of that future value if you don't play them this week. And I think it's safe to assume, Jason, that we're not looking below that in terms of win odds. Any of those teams. I just want to clarify that for anywhere
Yeah, I
out
would
there?
not dip this week below those two. And honestly, like you said, Minnesota, I'd probably make the argument that unless I loved it, I'm going to hold them because you never know how the end of the season will go. And they do play on Christmas against Detroit. Maybe that line's closer to a pick 'em by then. You never know, right? And so maybe you want to fire them in a really tough Christmas set of games just to be, have a chip in a chair and be in play. And so I'm not dying to pick Minnesota or Seattle, but I can understand an argument and sprinkling some of your entries that way.
All right, one last question before we get out of here. You and I were having we had a question off of air of who even was the Arizona running backs because they had so many injuries with James Conner out and now Trey Benson out. Michael Carter will step into that role, but I did read an article here that they are hosting tryouts. So my question to you is, are you going to hop on a flight to Phoenix and throw your name in the hat to be a running back for the
Buddy,
Arizona
I couldn't hit the hole. I would 0 yards after contact guy. That's it. That's me.
I think I might be good for one rep, but then I would get tackled and that would be the end of my career. So, and I really wouldn't look forward to the medical bills too. So, that is our show, our Circa Survivor show for week 5. Hopefully you found this helpful. Of course, you can go over to Pool Genius, go over to the Circa Survivor tab, look at all of our tools. And that tracking tool that Jason showed you earlier with my entry feature, where we have all of our Pool Genius entries saved, you can actually get that for free and track all your entries. Really good place to see your whole portfolio right there in front of you. And then we have some additional premium features where you can look at what we showed you, the season planner, the data grid, things like that, which will evolve as the week goes on and we get more information. Jason's also writing a super in-depth strategy article on Circa Survivor every week that breaks down all these decision points, and based off of who you used, based off of the popularity, shows you what you should be thinking about and which paths should be available to you. So with that, we encourage you to check it all out, and we are signing off. Good luck in Circa Survivor week number 5.